Hello there, I hope you're having a good day, and I want to talk about free models in Roblox and sort of the stigma against them, which for me is an interesting topic. I know maybe not for everyone. And I think when I was imagining this talk in my head before I sat down to record it, I think I will end up talking about some of the old school days of games and how programming was done, which I only started programming maybe 12-15 years ago, so that's not coming from first-hand experience. That is because, you know, since I've been programming for like 12-15 years, I've learned some things about the history. You know, as you do over the years, you sometimes look at the history of stuff that you're interested in. That's good. It's very valuable if you want to understand something. Look at the history of it. Kind of figure out what people were thinking, why they did certain things. Okay, now, the free model thing. I think this is a point of contention between me and a lot of people, but there's a really good reason to not use, a really obvious and very good reason to not use free models, which is really the main reason, which is that it's not original, right? When you use a free model in your game, that model could be out there in the wild in anybody's game. And so you are kissing goodbye originality in that little, on that particular issue of that free model. Now that said, and then a reason that's commonly given is security. So I'll talk about that. But to me, the good reason... Now, okay, somebody who is not a programmer, security is an issue if there's scripts. A lot of the free models have no scripts in them. So let's talk about security. Let's get that out of the way. To me, it's a very boring topic, but it's important. Actually, I mean, security in general is fascinating, but this issue of security on these Roblox free models is quite boring to me. But it's... When I see a script, I look at the script, I read it, and lately, well, I thought at some point, if you were being really crafty, you could put in a bunch of white space, lots of space, and then at the very end, like after a lot of white space that goes way off the screen, then you have some nasty stuff in there. Now, I have no idea what you could write that is going to, like, open some kind of vulnerability so you can hack someone's computer or do something nasty. But I think Roblox has probably had, it sounds like they've had problems with this before. So I look at the scripts, I check them, and I try to scroll all the way to the right and look for every possible place where there could be any text. And, you know, like with, on the web, for example, there are, to give an example of a kind of interesting vulnerability, sometimes there will be phishing attacks. I think it's a phishing attack where there's certain, like, because we use Unicode to have all these different languages, there's some really crafty things you can do with letters that basically look identical, but they're actually different in the Unicode. Maybe because they're from a different language, Russian, whatever. And so you can, like, have for example, an email address or a domain name that looks very, very similar. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. Actually, maybe they're ASCII. I don't remember exactly in what context it was. It was something, you know, on internet related, where with Unicode, maybe it's in code, actually. It's in code itself, perhaps, where you can change something where it's very, very hard to notice the difference. Maybe even, like, borderline impossible. So I think that's interesting, but I don't see how that applies here, because if anybody... if I saw malicious code, I would know it. And because, first of all, you probably need some kind of web address or URL, an IP address or something. There's all kind of, I would know, like, I can read code, I can recognize it. Now, people could try to obfuscate their code, and there's some very crafty things you can do with metaprogramming where you try, like, you, for example, create a string that will be executed as code, and then you do a bunch of stuff to manipulate that string. You can make it basically impossible to read. However, that also is very obvious. If something is intentionally obfuscated, you know, that's very obvious to me. So you can look and see, like, okay, whatever this is, it's deliberately confusing, so let me not run that. Right? So personally, now there's another possibility, which I think is unlikely, but from my point of view, it's a possibility, that even just importing a model, somehow there's a way to run a script. I find that unlikely. I think that you have to at least press play on the game or something. And furthermore, I mean, I think it makes sense that Roblox has had trouble with this in the past, that, you know, they kind of do things shooting from the hip a bit. Like, a lot of their templates are buggy and stuff like that, so it wouldn't surprise me that they've run into these problems in the past. But if they did, they would have gotten burned, and by now I think most of the stuff in the toolbox is probably okay. Nonetheless, I always check the scripts. So I'm not personally too worried about the whole security side of it. Now, it's easy to say, like, oh, well, I have nothing to hide, so I'm not worried about somebody hacking. But actually, if you really think about it, somebody getting into your computer, hacking it, and getting access to your email and your bank info and all that kind of stuff, it could be a huge kind of nightmare, basically. So it is really important to take security very seriously. Perhaps I'm being naive, but you know, to me, there's much worse things out there. Like, as a developer, if you've heard of Node.js, the whole world of Node.js it's like a lot of time bombs just waiting to go off, because people are basically, you have an app, a web app using Node.js, and you're constantly updating packages. There's constant updates going on, and that is necessary because there's new security vulnerabilities occurring, and people have to patch their stuff. And then after they patch it, yeah, you have to get the patches. Basically nobody reads all the code of all the patches all the time. So it's sort of the Wild West, because we're always getting the newest stuff, and basically there's going to be not only vulnerabilities but straight up malicious code inserted from time to time, and it's pretty awful, but that's just the reality of the world we live in. There's security vulnerabilities all over the place. And if you work in web development, I mean, if you worked at a big company with 20,000 employees and you know, let's be honest, there's no way to keep it secure. There's no way to prevent 20,000 employees to keep, but let's say you have 1,000 employees who are actually working on code, to have them always doing good security practices is utterly impossible. So the reality is the world is riddled with security vulnerabilities everywhere all the time, and that's the way it is. We can always strengthen things, and the good thing is that just because something gets hacked, you know, it's not the end of the world. Okay, it causes a lot of problems for the company. It causes a lot of problems for credit card companies and insurance companies, and people's identities getting stolen. It's a lot of problems. But for example, nuclear reactors are supposed to be totally isolated from the internet, right? Stuff like that. Really, mission critical, essential things are supposed to be completely isolated. Oh my God. That would be a huge mistake if they're not, and humans make really stupid mistakes sometimes. Look at Chernobyl, look at what happened with Fukushima. So we have to be very careful. And airplane designs and all kinds of things, mistakes are made, and unfortunately people do die, and it's terrible. And that's reality. That's the world we live in. So to me, that's like, all that stuff is scary, but just part of life. And worrying about these Roblox scripts where I can read all the code before I execute it, as far as I know, personally, I'm not worried. And if I could be wrong, and so if that's the case, show me the evidence, because I've seen so many people telling me that it's dangerous to use free models, but nobody's mentioned that you know, if code gets executed right when you import it, which I doubt, that would be incredibly stupid from Roblox, but possible, right? It's in the realm of possibilities, but I extremely doubt that, because I've never heard anybody talk about it, and it would be incredibly stupid. But I'll say it's possible. Okay, and yeah, that's how I feel about the security stuff. Like, I kind of roll my eyes. Maybe I'm being naive, okay? Maybe I'm wrong. I could be. But like I said, there's things I'm way more worried about personally than that. Okay, so that's the security stuff. Got that out of the way. Let's not talk about that anymore. The big reason is lack of originality. And I think so there's two ways that I imagine having success. One is doing a good job, making something good, and being successful. The other way is through cheap gimmicks, and so many games on Roblox are garbage, where it's like, pay 800 Robux and you can nuke everyone, and then, you know, you just have this like slappy hand, which is a free model, and or you can, you know, pay 500 Robux to have a magic carpet and you can fly around. That stuff is garbage, but guess what? They're doing it because it's working, right? It's like little kids are paying a bunch of Robux because they're little kids and they're new to the world, and you know, to them it's fun, and they don't know the value of money, and you know, it's just the way it is. And it's kind of sad. I mean, it's like seeing, if you see too many commercials interrupting, and at some point it's annoying, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's like commercials. It's like cheap, get rich quick schemes, you know. It's just, it's not great. But that's one way that people are definitely making a lot of money on the platform. And if I got really desperate, I'm not above that, honestly. If I could live off of making that cheap garbage, I would probably hold my nose and do it. Though I would really like to succeed in the good way, being original and good first, and not have to do that cheap garbage, which would make me feel pretty bad every day. Probably. I would hate doing that. So I could just get a normal job and not have to do that. But what was I gonna say? So yeah, so I imagine being, you know, if I were to be successful on the platform, probably I have to do a lot of original stuff, which means not free models. I don't think that free models are a recipe for success. But people have this like religion against free models. It's like a mantra you just hear everybody repeating. Don't use that. And for one thing, they don't always seem to understand the goal. So that's the first thing, is that the goal is, first of all, to learn and to improve incrementally, okay? And so every game that I've put out there, every game that I have put an ad on or anything like that, my goal is to learn. Absolutely none of those situations did I think, oh, this is going to be really successful. People are going to love this. Because I didn't put that much effort into it, and my goal has been to learn. Like, that's the first thing you do when you are new to something. You learn it first, right? And that has been the only thing that I've done so far. But I'm looking at maybe changing that, going in a direction of putting a lot more work into one project, for example. But that's a big decision. If you're going to put hundreds of hours and also pay people for help on one project, you know, you need a lot of preparation, sort of planning and thought before you embark on that journey. And actually, there's a lot of experimentation that I need to do. There's a lot more experimentation that I need to do, and incremental improvement. So that's the first thing is the goals. But there's another thing. When people tell me that I should never use free models, even for this sort of experimental stuff, and not everyone is like that. Some people are saying, you know, if you want to be successful, you need to get away from that, which is fair, totally fair. But a lot of people, again, are just sort of like religious, like never use free models. And here's the thing. They're kind of putting me through a loop without realizing it when they do that. Because, so when I started programming after a month or two, I started doing game engine stuff because games are fun. It's a way to incentivize yourself to learn programming. So I started using Unity like 12 years ago or something, more probably. And okay, that was cool. But then I went through a period of a few years where I didn't use any game engine and I would build stuff from scratch. Sometimes kind of like building your own engine, but actually, so I want to talk about that. So people tend to think, this is a mistake. So people have groupthink, okay? The vast majority of what people say, they haven't really thought about much themselves. They just say it because everyone says it. That's why, you know, it's just the way it is, right? Because it's a shortcut to intelligence and the world's complicated. You know, you can't be an expert on everything. So the doctor tells you this thing, so okay, they're the expert, I go with it. The physicist tells you this thing, okay, you know, usually, unless you're an expert in that field, probably they know better. So it's sort of a shortcut. It's inevitable. We have to listen to what other people say, and we kind of go with that. So the vast majority of stuff that people say is stuff that they did not really think about themselves. So it's just kind of, I don't know, that's like at least like 95% of it for the most part. And a significant number of people aren't really thinking about what they're saying at all. It's just, most people don't really spend a lot of time thinking. I see that, like, that's a realization for me because I spend several hours a day thinking. I'm a thinker. I go on long walks and think and think and think. And I have that monologue. Apparently some people don't have that, the monologue going in their head. So I'm a thinker. So it's surprising for me coming across, you know, I'm 37 years old. I've come across a lot of individuals, and a lot of people are not thinking at all, for themselves anyway. So that's just the way it is. And so like with game development, okay, people they act like there's two possibilities. Either you use an engine, or you build your own engine and you're a lunatic. And those are the two possibilities, and that's it. And that's not actually how we should think. Building your own game engine is, I guess, a possibility, though it is a very, very tall task. But the two main possibilities, in my view, are either use an engine, like Roblox Studio, that's an engine. Unity, Unreal Engine, there's some engines that use Python, Pygame, this kind of stuff. There's lots of engines out there. Game Maker, Godot, free open source software engine. So there's lots of engines. That's one possibility. The other main possibility is to build your game from scratch. Nothing to do with an engine. So just when you listen to people talk, or you read them talking on the internet, they don't seem to get this. Those are the two main possibilities. Engine or build from scratch. And people, it's just not part of the discourse. I've never really seen people talk about this. But if you go back to how games were made in the past, all of the Nintendo games and Super Nintendo games, okay, old original Nintendo and the Super Nintendo, all those games were written from scratch. There were no engines back then, okay? And they were written in assembly. So sometimes you hear, like, there's that famous game, Roller Coaster Tycoon. I played that when I was a kid. Great game, great series of games, classic. And sometimes you see on the internet, people point out, oh, that was written in assembly. What a crazy mad lad lunatic to write that in assembly. And fair enough. I mean, that is a real accomplishment in assembly. However, I mean, then you realize all the games back then were written in assembly. They were all written in assembly. I mean, at that time, I don't know, maybe you could have written stuff in C. There might have been some other options. But roughly in that era, you know, yeah, definitely Super Nintendo era, but going back, famous games like Command and Conquer and StarCraft, I would expect probably written in C. So there was this transition, right? But Super Nintendo games, there too, maybe C, but most of them I think assembly. Maybe even all of them were assembly, and definitely the regular Nintendo games. Diablo written in C. I think StarCraft was written in C, and I'm pretty sure Diablo, the original Diablo, was written in C. And there's no engines here. Like, engines are not even remotely part of the conversation when you're talking about, you know, how they wrote StarCraft or Diablo, these classic games. You know, all the original Final Fantasy games, Dragon Quest, those were assembly. Just engines weren't remotely part of the conversation. So there's just this, actually, and the Super Nintendo era and StarCraft, Warcraft 2, Roller Coaster Tycoon, you know, the old Sim Cities, and Diablo, that was a Command and Conquer. All of that was kind of a golden age era of games, honestly. Later, Halo was all right, but the Xbox, I had an Xbox, and off the top of my head, that's the only game I remember right now, Halo. Yeah, now, there's like one game, the original Halo was okay. It was good. Halo was good. I had a PlayStation 3, did not like it, barely played it at all. I didn't like the controller. Now, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there were a bunch of great games. PlayStation 2 definitely had a bunch of great games. The original PlayStation, bunch of great games. Nintendo 64, great games. So there was a golden age era. I will fight and die on that hill. And I think Minecraft is a classic game. Now we're getting to, you know, way further into the future. When was that? 2000? Was it 2009 or 2011? Or was it before that? So Minecraft, classic, great game, and I think there's a generation of kids who are probably now like 20 or so who kind of grew up with Minecraft. And I hope we're kind of getting back into, there might be a new golden age coming, because they're kind of starting, because just the technology is getting so much better. The technology is incredible, and the PlayStation 5 controller, really satisfying. I'm happy with the PlayStation 5, so I'm optimistic. I'm not one of the people who just always says that the old stuff is better. The Final Fantasy VII remake, fantastic. Okay, but there was a golden age era, Super Nintendo in particular, N64, PlayStation 2, and then there was a bit of a lull. Things went downhill a bit. Other than Halo, Xbox was pretty boring. Even GameCube, pretty okay. And I'm sorry, like, I'm sure people have favorite games that are that I'm glossing over. I'm sorry about that. But just overall, okay, this is how I think of these things. Anyway, so what I wanted to say was, it's not really about either you use an engine or you write your own engine. It's really, I mean, you could write your own engine, but that is pretty bananas. That's a whole different thing. That's not really game development. That's a business decision. Okay, that's a really advanced, complicated, big project. But it's really between using an engine or just writing it from scratch. And I think that because the thinking is kind of backwards, people, you know, like take like Stardew Valley. They didn't use an engine. It was basically written from scratch. They didn't make their own engine either. So stuff like that, you know, some of these indie games, you can basically, and I think, yeah, there's just a little problem in how people talk about these things. Writing your game from scratch is definitely a possibility. I think it's a very reasonable thing, and it's great for learning. So I went through phases of studying C and writing things from scratch, all kinds of graphic stuff, OpenGL stuff. So that was interesting. And I've used Unity a bit, you know, hundreds of hours, whatever. But so coming from there, and then just last year, going to experimenting with Roblox. See, Roblox, their selling point is really how easy it is to make a game. That's their main selling point. So, I mean, I'll mention a few other like merits or attractive things about it. I mean, for one thing, it has kind of sometimes a slight Minecraft-y vibe, at least with sort of blocky stuff, especially in the past. Maybe that's attractive for some people. And you could say, well, it's a platform where you have lots of people there. But that's true of all the main platforms, right? If you put your game on Steam, there's lots of people on Steam. Itch.io, I don't know much about it, but there's other platforms. And they all have, all the major platforms have a ton of people there. So that doesn't distinguish it. That is a merit. If it didn't have that, it would be a problem. That is a merit. But that's not a distinguishing feature. And so, so it's really the ease of making things. And for one thing, I mean, a huge thing, like coming from my background, Unity and building things from scratch, you know, like when you think about making something online and multiplayer, that is a huge hurdle to say, okay, I'm going to, like, let me walk you through this, like a typical experience developing with Unity. And I haven't done much Unity in the last couple of years, so it might have changed a bit, but here's a typical experience. They have stuff on the marketplace. Some of it's free. Most of the good stuff is premium. Now, I was willing to spend a little money, but the stuff on the marketplace, it's always like none of it is really updated properly. So it's always like for different versions of Unity. And so here's an experience. You have some kind of character controller. You have to build that from scratch, like the camera controls. Like with Roblox, you have this character moving around and the camera moves around. You have third person stuff going on and all the character animations, running all the controls. So yeah, camera, controls, character, animation, all that stuff. Just right from the get-go, from the beginning. You have to build all that stuff, right? Normally, right? With Unity. Okay, so there are tutorials online. Some of them you can copy paste. Otherwise, sometimes you have to write it in, which is really annoying. Or you could go on the Unity Marketplace, get something. So, okay, now you have a character controller. But then let's say you want to add weapons. Well, guess what? The weapons and the controller are not going to, almost 100% of the time, they're not going to jive together. So you always have this hacky situation where you always have to do a lot of work just to get anything to work together. Or you just have to build everything yourself from scratch. And then you get to the whole multiplayer thing. Guess what? That's going to be, first of all, it's going to take days just to get it set up and working correctly, usually. Figuring out how to test it is kind of a pain. And then getting the character controller with the weapons to work together with all the netcode is a very tall order that just that alone could take months and still be a buggy nightmare. Whereas with Roblox, you can have all that stuff within 30 seconds, you see. So that's the main selling point for Roblox, is wow, you can do all this stuff. Like, you can kit bash, essentially. You can throw all this stuff in there and just start playing and experimenting. And then you can, if you have a little money, you can sponsor your experience and have people playing it, and you can get stuff going and play around in really a short, really short amount of time. So that's what's nice about it. And so when you then say to me, look, again, I don't envision success based on free models, okay? I think originality is necessary. But when you say to me, like a mantra or religion, do not use free models, you see, like, you're destroying you're destroying the whole point of Roblox, is that it's easy to play around and experiment. So every time, and for me in the beginning it was fun, you know, just throwing in these guns and running around with sniper rifles and rocket launchers and shooting each other. It was fun. Is it original? Is it unique? No. Has it made me successful? Is it going to make me successful? No, but I'm learning. So yeah, so I think I said what I said my piece, said what I wanted to say. That's about it. I mean, it's just people have this mantra, like this religion, like, do not use free models, and there's a bit of truth to it, but there's a weird stigma, and I think the problem is that they don't realize that, like, that's what Roblox is about, putting together all this random shenanigans. I mean, they're not beautiful, amazing games. They're just like a bunch of random run around slapping with this giant hand and dropping mines and shooting rocket launchers and doing weird, silly things. That's what it's about. So anyway, so you can play around and study things, and it's a nice starting point that you can it's a diving board you can jump off from and build from there to make something original and interesting. So I'm thinking of doing kind of deep dives into weapons systems in Roblox Studio, because I want to build my own weapon system, and so I'm going to be maybe looking at a bunch of stuff, and I think recording it, it might be of interest to some people, and will also help me to go through it. Have you heard of rubber ducking? That's a thing for programmers, that talking about something will help you make sense of stuff. So sometimes making a video for me is a little bit of the rubber ducking. So let me know what you think. If you enjoy my content, remember to leave a like, and thank you. Hope you have a good day. Bye.